Hello, Montessorians. Welcome to another live coaching call. Today we have a wonderful guest, Mark Publow, who is here to talk about fundraising. I sent him a few of your questions that you sent me, but today we're going to get to know Mark a little bit more and get some pro tips on how we can do some fundraising. So Mark, without further ado, I just wanted to welcome you to our community of Montessorians. We're super thankful to have you here, and I know you're a busy guy, so you're taking time out of your super busy schedule to join us. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. I'm very glad to be here, and hopeful I can offer some things that will be helpful. I certainly do understand that most of the Montessoris are smaller nonprofits that have limited bandwidth, limited capacity for a lot of things, including for fundraising. And so, the question is, how do we deploy or extend ourselves in this area when we've got so many other things, on our plates? And if we are going to make efforts, how do we make efforts that count or that make a difference? Mm-hmm. One of the questions was, how does a small nonprofit who hasn't had a lot of experience with outside funding support or with building relationships with funders, how do you get started? How do you begin to engage with in one of the things that I would suggest is that you begin with what I call an asset mapping exercise, and your folks may or may not be familiar with that concept, that notion.
Yeah, can you tell us what that is?
Sure. So an asset mapping exercise for any organization really involves looking at several things. What are you particularly what are the areas in which your outcomes or the impact of what you do most evident, right? Mm-hmm. So those become the things that make it most clear for talking with people outside of your organization, for communicating what the impact or what the value that your organization's bringing. And that typically, in the case of, say, Montessori, would go beyond, well, we serve X number of students, in these grade levels, but what are the kinds of ways that you're able to see or to measure change or impact or learning? And obviously in a Montessori environment, that includes not just sort of traditional academic measures, but also things like social emotional learning and elements that kind of look at the more of the whole child as opposed to just one aspect of who a child might be. So one place to start with asset mapping is mapping out how can you talk about and communicate your impact or your outcomes. And that's really important because when you're talking with funders, there's for better or for worse, 1 million nonprofits in the U.S. The average person who does donate to one nonprofit donates to at least 5 nonprofits. So typically the issue when you're talking with someone about a donation, whether it's an individual or a business or organization, is not do they donate? It's how do you compete to be one of those 5 that in essence they've already made a decision to support, but you have to sort of find your place amongst a set of others that they're also supporting. So that starts with really being able to communicate your impact or communicate what value you bring to the population that you're serving and to your community. The second thing to look at is your relationships. You want to map what relationships you have. Do Montessori's have boards of directors?
Most of them do, yes.
Do. Yeah. So a good place to start in mapping your relationships would be who are your board members and how do your board members potentially help connect you in your community, right? Mm-hmm. That can be to other people that they're friends with, that they're business associates with, that they that they know through various social circles or other networks that they're a part of. And, oftentimes, a nonprofit will look to board members and say, what can that board member do to contribute themselves directly? But there's a phrase that's often used with respect to board members and other people, advisory board members or other people that are helping your organization, and that is, the phrase there is called give and get, or give or get. And basically what that refers to is, someone can help you financially by what they can personally give. They can also help you financially by what they can help you get. And I'll give one very brief example. Actually, when I was in Phoenix, working with another organization, one of the board members of that organization, we had a requirement that every board member had to make a financial contribution every year. And that was not a requirement before I got to that organization, but it became one after I got there. And so this board member would come every December 31st, the last day of the year, and pull out his wallet, come into the office. He wouldn't put something in the mail. He wouldn't go online. Come into the office, pull out his wallet, and give me a $100 bill. And that was his personal contribution. So, appreciate every gift, but $100 is not going to change the world. It helps. But that board member was especially good at introducing me and the organization to people he knew, and to being sort of a goodwill ambassador for us. And in the 3 years I was at that organization, that board member introduced us to 10 new people who gave at least $10,000 a year. In some cases, some of the people he introduced us to started giving us $10,000 a year and ended up giving us $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 a year. But he didn't give, he still gave $100. So his value really was what he helped us, or who he helped us get, not what he personally gave. So you asset map again back to your relationships. Start with board members, start with staff. I just, in the organization I'm with now, Children's Defense Fund, we have a staff person who works in our communications team, who does not have a fundraising role. What she does have is a brother-in-law you talk to, and she is very passionate about what we do, and so in talking with her brother-in-law, that passion came out. And the brother-in-law said, well, basically how can I help support what you're doing? And she said, well, you can make a donation. So he did yesterday. He made a first-time donation to us for $5,000. So, start with your relationships. They have much more value than you anticipate. Obviously, that, in the case of Montessori, can include parents as well. And again, the way to think about parents is not simply or solely on what can your parent, who's already paying tuition, give you in addition to what they're already spending, but also what can they help you get? Who can they help you introduce to, right? And again, it can be a business, it can be a set of friends. It can also be things like service clubs, right? Rotary or Kiwanis or whomever. And again, if you ever do have the opportunity to, talk to somebody that you get introduced to, you have to go back to that first mapped as far as your assets, which is what are your outcomes, what's your impact, what's the value you add to your community. Mm-hmm. Serve. And if you have a good elevator speech, right, not a long 5-10 minute answer, but a good 30-second a speech that you could cite as you're in the elevator going from one floor to another with somebody, that is tremendously helpful for you to be able to make your case and be able to convert people to support your cause. The third thing that you should map, and this is going to maybe be a little bit, maybe familiar to some of your people and maybe not, but what are the stories that you have to tell, right? we talked about outcomes. What's your impact? How do you measure the difference you make with your children? What are your relationships? But what are the stories you have to tell? It's a third asset that's very critical for nonprofits. And, the stories are best when they are about one person or one child. They're not as good when they're about a whole classroom or about a bunch of people. They're really most effective or most powerful when you can tell a story about one child and how that child, was able to show improvement, maybe was able to overcome a challenge or difficulty that they were facing, and maybe was able to overcome a hardship in their life. And obviously you want to do that in a way that is sensitive and appreciative and respectful. But those stories are invaluable when it comes to raising money. And you don't need 100 stories. You need one really good story. As long as you don't tell that same story for the next 3 years, you want to come up with fresh stories. But you don't need a big library of stories. You need 1 or 2 or 3 really good stories that can help people understand. Okay, this organization does good work. It makes a difference, and in the life of Jessica, or in the life of Jamila, or in the life of Jesus, or whomever it is that you're serving. This particular child had an experience that impacted or even changed their life.
Sure.
So that's really an important place I found to start, is to start with an asset mapping exercise. And it doesn't have to take you, huge amount of time, but it's a really good way for you to get started, because it allows you to appreciate what you have as opposed to focus on what your deficits or what your gaps are, right? What I don't have.
Mm-hmm. And even also, Mark, what we do, because I think oftentimes, especially as Montessorians, we get caught up in explaining exactly what we do, because there's a lot of misconception on how we deliver our programs, what we do, what is this Montessori thing, and there's variations of that out there. So being able to communicate that clearly is difficult. So oftentimes what we're doing is we're spending all of our time explaining that and not putting enough time on the impact that we're truly making, and what we do in our communities to create that impact. So even that asset mapping can be helpful to pull those things out, because that's ultimately where the connection is. That's where you create that change and give that outcome that is worth a lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine in the case of your network of Montessori schools, there's an issue that I've seen a lot of parallels with many nonprofits of different types, and that is oftentimes we get caught up in and we get comfortable with focusing on the technical aspects of what we do, why we do it the way we do it, the sort of nitty-gritty details around why what we do is so important or whatever. But what we really have to remember is when you're talking with a potential funder, you have to understand that they're talking a different language than you are. I used to travel a lot internationally and think about it in terms of different languages, right? If you're in East Africa, you might speak Swahili, which is a language that's used in parts of Kenya and other areas of East Africa, or you could be speaking Amharic, which is a language used in Ethiopia. If you're speaking Swahili and the person that you're talking to doesn't know that language, you're not communicating. And for the most part, funders don't either have the time or the attention span to kind of get into the same level of technical details that you're going to get into when you're having a conversation with your colleagues. And you sort of have to bottom line it for them, and you have to make it, you have to translate it into terms that they can understand. And again, back to why do we focus on talking about our impact, our outcomes, as opposed to the ways in which we get to those outcomes, or the ways why those are so important. They're very important to us, the ways that we get to those outcomes. They're really not that important to people who can write a check. What is important to those people is, you guys are making a difference. That's great. I don't really understand it, but I don't have to understand it. I just need to know you're making a difference. That's also why storytelling becomes so important, because it's another way of translating to people in ways that they can understand, in a language that they can understand. What I will say also, and this is sometimes I think a misunderstanding in nonprofits, people think that, some people sometimes will say that if you just give somebody enough facts, they'll make a rational decision, they'll come to a rational decision that your organization is worthy of support. And research shows, actually, nobody makes a donation decision based on facts. They make a donation decision based on emotion. And when I say nobody, I mean nobody. I'm talking about corporations, big foundations. Now, they will look for facts to support their emotions. That's where we get confused, right? If they have an emotional sense that they're connected to what you're doing, or that they're moved by the story you've told, sometimes, especially with people that make larger gifts, they'll also look for sort of facts to sort of justify the emotion that they might be feeling. But fundamentally, the decision to make a donation or not is an emotional decision, and that is time and again borne out by research that's been done. People that give $100 million fundamentally are making an emotional decision in the same way that somebody who gives $10 is. They might look for bigger reasons to justify their gift, but fundamentally, for them, it's about an emotional choice.
Sure. So, Mark, I know that a lot of our schools struggle with competing with not having data. So if you compare Montessori to traditional education, right, oftentimes what is not there for the data is the test scores.
Yeah.
Well, that's a key piece.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go to funders and they're used to that system, but we don't have that data to back up, but we absolutely know that, we are making a complete shift in a child's life. We're building the skills that support them through life, and that's hard to measure. There's definitely initiatives that are happening to work to measure that, but competing against a database that has been in existence for so long is challenging for especially small Montessori schools to go out there and, make a case that we are worth funding versus, who we're competing against. So you have any tips or thoughts about that?
The main thing I would say is not every nonprofit is a fit for every donor, and not every donor is a fit for every nonprofit. Mm-hmm. So if you have donors or funders who are principally biased towards making their decision based on hard data or certain sets or types of hard data, really what you have to, and that's not where you live, right? That's not what you have to make your case. Fundamentally, you recognize that funder isn't, a suitable funder for my organization at this point in time, right? Doesn't mean forever and forever. The organization I work with today, Children's Defense Fund, has a fairly large education-focused element of what it does, with a lot of after-school programming and summer programming. And, we can point to things like there's reading level gains on average of, X number of months for people that participate in a 6-week program, which is great. what that really doesn't convey in any way are what we are able to see in terms of things like social emotional learning, which we think are as important or maybe even much more significant in sort of the life of that child and their ability to have success in school over time. And so again, you have to say, well, what does a particular funder need or require, and which funders may be more receptive to the kinds of information and data, if you will, that we are able to provide. And I will say I've seen a pretty big shift in the funding community overall in areas like education to be much more receptive to life skills, social emotional learning improvements, um, uh, issues related to self-esteem, well-being, positive mental health, a lot of factors that go into not just things around test scores, but around, are they going to stay in school, are they going to finish school, are they going to be have the resilience emotionally and intellectually, or to be able to have an opportunity to be successful as they transition to adulthood. So there's a lot more flexibility or openness, but not with every funder. And so you have to make a fairly quick kind of triage assessment if you want to compare it to an emergency room and say, okay, this funder is not a fit for me. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but this other one might be more receptive, so let me spend more time on them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great advice. Absolutely. Can we talk a little bit about the sources of funding?
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine a lot of our members are in a place where, they know they need funding. The funding that they currently have is either sustainable or dwindling a bit. And so they know they need to reach out to other sources. They get the idea of asset mapping, like let's utilize our board more. And they've got plenty of stories. Our members have so many stories about the life-changing things they're doing on the ground. What are the sources of funding available for a small school that they can tap into? So what would they search for?
Well, there's sort of a theoretical answer and there's a practical answer, and they both, I think, have merit. So the theoretical side of the answer to your question is, there is not a one-size-fits-all, ideal funding model for every Montessori, for every nonprofit. If you think of it like an investment portfolio, right? You can choose to put your retirement money into, all into stock equities, all into bonds. You can mix your stock into growth stocks and income stocks. You can put it into international versus U.S. You can do all kinds of things to mix up your investment portfolio, and you come up with a mix that works for you. I think in the same way for a nonprofit, you have to kind of look at your sources of revenue in terms of that is my portfolio today. Where do I have opportunities to change that, or to reduce the risks or increase the strength of the results my portfolio is producing for me. The practical answer is, well, and the other side of the theoretical answer is, there's no one-size-fits-all solution, but an answer that is always right for everyone is diversification. What you always want to look for is, how can I broaden the diversification of the sources of support I have? And a lot of times people will think of diversification like, okay, I'm getting money through these three ways today. I need three more ways in addition to the three ways I'm already getting money. And I think that's true, but what's also true is you can diversify within the channels you're already getting money in. And a lot of nonprofits will sort of will try to jump past that opportunity and look for something else that's new. When actually, one of the ways to start is, where you're already getting money, can you get it? Is there a way to broaden or diversify that? So if you're asking parents for additional funding support as one example, how are you asking them? Are you asking them in terms of, general support? Are you doing it on a seasonal basis? Are you doing it, as part of kind of an annual fund type appeal? Or are you doing it around special projects or special needs? And if the answer is you're only doing it in terms of, a general appeal or an end of year appeal, try adding a project appeal to it, right? Try adding an appeal that's based around a particular need. You want to expand your capacity to deliver, STEM programming. You want to, you have a facility enhancement need. You need to improve the playground. Whatever your need is, do it around a project, and people will oftentimes not see that as substitutionary or their annual gift. They'll see it as something additional because it's very concrete and specific. The thing is, you just don't want to do that at the same time as you're making your annual fund request, right? So if you're doing, an annual fund request in every December, then you might want to do a project request, at another time of the year that has enough separation so that people don't see it as directly overlapping. The practical answer comes back to what we talked about with asset mapping. Your sources of fund often can be defined by relationships and which doors those relationships open to, right? So you may not think that, a group of students in an association or a sorority at your local university would be a donor to your organization. But I've seen amazing things happen with student groups. I was just talking with someone this morning who's just graduated from a school where she was involved with a fundraising project, and they raised $100,000 as a student group for a local nonprofit. Unbelievable. And the nonprofit hardly had to do anything except, show up and take the check, which is obviously what nonprofits love to be able to do. But, again, back to relationships. If somebody has a connection, right? A board member has a daughter in college, local university or college, who's part of an association. It may be that person just can help make an introduction for you that opens a door. So be attentive, be watchful, be alert to opportunities that come to you through the relationships that you have. And I will simply say, it has been the most common place of surprising avenues of support that I found over 35 years of doing this work. Is that, I can have the best strategy in the world, and then all of a sudden, somebody has a relationship that I get introduced to that opens up a door that was not in my plan, right? And yet it becomes something that's significant. So, I can say after the fact, oh yeah, it was part of our plan, but it really wasn't, because all it was somebody, helping to open up a door that we didn't even know there for us to open.
Sure. Yeah. So, Mark, this is going to sound like a very simple question, but I think it's important to keep in mind this piece. So, when we talk about sources of funding, how is that structured? We've got companies who, have a certain part of their budget allotted to, donations. We have organizations, individuals. How is that structure or what are the sources that are available for someone to tap into just so they're aware of it
Mhm.
if they are having those conversations? How does that work?
Um, well, they're in today's world, they are more and more diverse, which makes it in some respects more and more complicated, which probably isn't what you hear. But
I'm not afraid of complicated. It's okay.
yeah, the ways that today that money comes to a nonprofit are much more um, much much more numerous than the ways that traditionally, people used to be, people would write a check, they put it in the mail, they'd maybe make a gift online through your website, and that was probably about it. Maybe they'd attend an event, right, that you have, and make a donation at the event. But that was about it. Today there are so many ways that people make a gift and or find you. One of the things to look at, um, and this is again a very practical thing, but it's not insignificant, is if someone who's a donor or potential donor works for a company that has a matching gift program. And what is that? That's where companies will set aside money in their budget, and instead of them, kind of randomly making charitable donations to whomever, they will say, we're going to support the causes that our employees support, and we will match what our employees give. So, for them, it's kind of for the company, it's kind of a twofer, right? They're getting two things out of it. One is they're able to not have all the hassle of having to figure out who to give to independently, because they can kind of follow their employees' lead, so it makes it easier for them. And two, it helps build loyalty and affinity between the company and the employee, because the company is kind of supporting what the employee cares about, and hopefully that, from the company standpoint, that leads to the employees being more motivated, having a more positive view of the company, and hopefully staying at the company longer, not going someplace else. And oftentimes companies will donate on a dollar for dollar basis. So if somebody gives you $100, you can put in for a match, and you'll get another $100 from the company if they give you. And sometimes some companies will do more than a dollar. They'll do a 2 or a 3-to-1 match, right? So somebody gives you $100, they'll give you $200 in addition. So, and that's true with parents as well, who, when they're paying Montessori fees, right, those aren't necessarily, you know, eligible for, say a company's matching gift program. But if they're making an extra gift or donation, that may well be. So, the amount of money that's given through corporate matching gifts, that's an interesting statistic. So there's over $2 billion a year in the U.S. that is given by companies as matching gifts for their employees' contributions. The interesting statistic is not that. The interesting statistic is there's about $7 billion a year in eligible employee contributions to charities, but only $2 billion a year of that is claimed. So, in other words, there's another $5 billion a year that could be going to charities, but no, either the employee or the charity isn't taking the time or effort to make sure that matching gift is fulfilled.
Is it usually where they have, and maybe this is a difficult question to answer because there's just so many different businesses, but
Mm-hmm.
do they typically have a formal process for selecting these, or is it really just, employees go there and go to their boss or go to their lead and say, hey, I really believe in this organization. This organization changed, either my life or somebody else's life. Can we do something? How is that?
It's typically based on employee choice. Some companies will establish some policies that exclude certain types of organizations that might be controversial or might be problematic of those. But they're obviously concerned about their own public relations. Another sort of angle on that whole side of business or corporate giving is um, where you have companies that basically identify or create an employee committee, which is usually 2 or 3 people, to make decisions about approving grants or gifts to local nonprofits. So, for example, Target and Walmart give through their local stores up to $1,000 per store based on a request, and you can make a request to that Target or to that Walmart. Who makes that decision is not the manager or not the corporate, somebody far, far away. It's whoever that store has picked as their employee, charity committee, right? Which is again 2 or 3 people typically, and that's $1,000 per store. That again, not every nonprofit is going to qualify for, but certainly Montessori is based on the fact that it's a local community serving organization. Again, the thing you want to do is not say, this is going to help pay for tuition necessarily, unless you're scholarshiping students, but you package around a way that the gift will help make an impact that enhances the educational experience for the students, or that makes that experience accessible to students that otherwise might not be able to afford it.
Right. So then if you can structure your funding where you have tuition covering your operations piece, what it means to stay in business, but then you have this additional funding source that can be supported by the outcomes you identify in your asset mapping. That positions you better to be able to build those relationships, which, by the way, Montessorians are so good at building relationships. As you're talking and as I'm listening, I'm taking, I have 15 Post-it notes over here. I'm taking a lot of notes. But there's a lot of parallels between what you're saying to reach out for donors to what we do to reach out to new families. So a lot of, the asset mapping that you're talking about can be used not only for donors, but also, our marketing approach and how we're communicating what we're doing. Because quite frankly, we love what we do and we like to talk about it. It is very complex and there are a lot of layers. And we tend to, like I said, get into that narrative and we lose people that just don't have that connection yet.
Yeah, and I think again it comes back to this. You have to learn this mindset. It's learned. It's not natural, and that is when you're talking with a prospective parent, when you're talking with prospective funder, remember or think about it as a conversation with somebody that it speaks a different language, right? So you've really got to focus your message in ways that the other person or party can connect with and can understand that they'll find meaningful, right? And like you said, over time, you might be able to kind of introduce them more and more to the technicalities of and specific issues that are involved with the work that you do. But that's not where you lead, and that's something that is well into the future before you start introducing those things. And if you introduce them in bite-sized, digestible pieces, not don't throw a whole 26-ounce steak at somebody and ask them to digest it in one bite, because even if they tried, it wouldn't feel very good.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mark, this has been incredibly helpful. Like I said, I'm taking a bunch of notes, and I know we've got 4 participants now. Feel free, you guys, if you're here and you've got questions for Mark. I think we've got about 5 or so minutes. Is that all right, Mark? You've got a little bit.
Yeah, I can give you 5 more minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so if you've got any specific questions that you have for Mark, I'm sure he's happy to answer them. And Mark, I feel like we could talk about this for a while. This is such a
Well, we can talk again sometime if you want.
Absolutely. I would love to have you back on. I think we'll have, more of a specific focus,
Sure.
particular component of fundraising that that our members need. But this has been really helpful just to give us a broad framework, because I know so many of us are trying to figure out how to branch out, how
Yeah.
to not continually tap into the parents that already pay tuition. We don't
Mm.
want to exhaust that resource. But we also, it's intimidating to go out and look for grants. Like, grant
Yeah.
writing in itself is daunting, and especially if you're a head of school or administrator that
Yeah.
does everything, there's just no time. Like, you don't sleep then.
Yeah, a lot of people, a lot of nonprofits will look at grants because they tend to be larger size gifts as, the answer, right, that will solve all of their problems. But what I've often told nonprofits is be careful what you ask for, or be careful what you pray for, because a lot of times I've seen grants actually be more harmful in the end to nonprofits than helpful, even though they approached it from a standpoint of, and especially if you get a very large grant, it just creates a lot of stress points if a nonprofit's not ready to sort of do what it is required to support that. But yeah, I guess I would leave you with a couple things. One, one thought is fundraising is both an art and a science, and there are very scientific aspects of fundraising. There's a ton of research that identifies what will be effective practices if you implement them consistently over time, and what will not be effective. But it's also an art, and the art really comes down to a sense of relationship and the ability to convey the passion of what you're doing and why what you're doing makes a difference. And if you can convey that passion, there's magic in that. The other thing I would just say is don't forget the fun in fundraising. Some people look at it and it's like, oh, this is the worst part of my day if I have to go out and spend time fundraising. But if you're not having fun, I guarantee the person that you're trying to get funding from isn't having fun with you. So try to approach it from a standpoint of, looking for ways to keep it fun, and looking for things that you can do to make it fun. And again, when you keep coming back to having, I get an opportunity to talk about the impact that my Montessori is having. I get an opportunity to tell, the story of this child and how this child's life was changed. I mean, who wouldn't want to be able to do that? Who wouldn't look forward to be able to do that? And if, by the way, in doing that, I can help somebody come to a decision to support what I'm doing or help meet a need that we have, then it becomes a win-win.
Right. We do the work to tell the story, and then maybe the ask doesn't even need to happen. They just.
Well, it happens in a way that's natural and not artificial, right? And the last thing I would say is don't be afraid of asking people. First of all, donors are a lot smarter than we want to give them credit for. And if you start a conversation with them, they have a pretty good idea it's going to end with something about you need money, right? So, don't make it awkward. Don't draw it out. Again, tell your story and say, would this be something you're interested in helping us with, right? That's all you have to say. Would you be interested in helping us with this, or being a part of this project, or helping us get to this next stage in what we're trying to do, or would you be interested? Would you be open to helping us improve our impact in this area? Mm-hmm. That's all you have to say.
Right.
And they'll tell you what they can do. They'll tell you the amount. And I keep saying it's the last thing I'll say. Last thing, promise. The last thing I'll say is.
It's okay. We keep getting goodies here.
Don't give an amount. Don't. If somebody says, if you say to somebody, would you be willing to help us, and they say sure, don't say, well, it'd be great if you could do a check for $100, right? And the thing is, I've seen many people, walk away from a donor with, $500, $5,000, and leave 10 times that much on the table that they could have gotten if they had just let the donor tell them what they wanted to do, as opposed to, kind of give the donor a pass and say, all right, well, I was going to give you 5,000, but if all you want is 500, here's a check. Thank you very much. All right. Well, thank you for your time. I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy day, and we'll welcome you back whenever you're ready.
All right. Very good. We'll be in touch. All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.